Welcome to the Oregon Department of Education Child Nutrition Program's webinar on procurement. This webinar is part of a series of technical assistance trainings that we are providing to child and adult food care program sponsors. My name is Dusty Kerr, and I will be your MC for today. Kathy Brock will be your chat and Q&A host, and she will be tracking any questions you ask for our Q&A session at the end. For all attendees, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat if you have not done so already. Please share your name and the name of the organization that you work for. Joining us today are our amazing presenters. I will let each of them introduce themselves. Richard? I think Richard might be having technical difficulties. We will pass it along to Dee Dee.
Okay, hopefully Richard's able to join us. Hi everyone, I'm Dee Dee Pointer. I'm the team lead of reviews for the CACFP and SFSP team here at ODE CMP. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm going to pass it along to Shirley.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Shirley Wu, and I am a child nutrition specialist and technical assistance coordinator. Happy to see you all today as well.
Richard, are you able to hop on?
Hi, my name is Kathy Brock, and I'll be filling the role of Richard until he is able to hop on. So welcome, everybody. I am a team lead on the community team with your applications and renewals.
Thanks, Kathy. And thank you, everyone. Let's check out what they will be presenting today. First, I will go over our learning objectives for this training. Then Richard or Kathy will go over our procurement overview. Dee Dee will go through the tools and resources, and Shirley will share the procurement procedure template. Here are the learning objectives for today. First, we want you to understand the 5 different procurement methods that are out there. Second, that you will implement the requirements to use small, minority, and women-owned enterprises. Third, that you will meet federal contract provisions. And finally, that you have the ability to complete a written procedure plan. Richard or Kathy will now review the procurement overview.
Thank you, Dusty.
You're welcome.
I am Richard Williams. I'm the procurement compliance specialist for the Child Nutrition Program. And today I'll be talking about the procurement requirement. So let's jump into it. Program sponsors must develop their own documented procurement procedures of how they are meeting the minimum requirements for their nonprofit food service account in accordance with 2 CFR 200.318A and 7 CFR 226C1. The program sponsor achieves this by cross-referencing state, local, and tribal statutes and regulations against the federal regulatory requirements and incorporate the most restrictive requirements into their procurement procedures. Program sponsors must keep in mind when writing their procurement procedures for the nonprofit food service account that the Oregon Revised Statutes 279A.030 outlines when federal funds are involved and there is a conflict between any provisions federal statutes and regulations govern. Program sponsors' procurement procedures set the standard of what the employees must follow to meet the regulatory requirements when using a nonprofit food service account. It must include requirements outlined in 2 CFR 200.318 through 2 CFR 200.327, applicable program requirements, along with other state and local provisions, if more restrictive. The program sponsor must maintain written standards of conduct covering conflicts of interest and governing actions of its employees engaged in the selection, award, and administration of contracts. No employee, officer, or agent may participate in the selection, award, or administration of a contract supported by a federal award if he or she has a real or apparent conflict of interest. An example of a conflict of interest would be less than arm's length transactions with families, friends, or consultants on retainer contracts. The program sponsor may neither solicit nor accept gratuities, favors, or anything of monetary value from a contractor or parties to subcontract. However, program sponsors may set standards for situations in which the financial interest is not substantial or the gift is an unsolicited item of a nominal value. The standard of conduct must provide for disciplinary actions to be applied for violations of such standards by officers, employees, and agents of the program sponsor. Program sponsors require all procurement transactions be conducted in a manner providing full and open competition consistent with the standards identified in 2 CFR 200.319 and 2 CFR 200.320. Some of the situations considered to be restrictive of competition include, but are not limited to, placing unreasonable requirements on firms in order for them to do business, requiring unnecessary experience or excessive bonding, non-competitive pricing practices between firms or between affiliated companies, non-competitive contracts to consultants on a retainer contract, organizational conflict of interest, specifying only a brand name product instead of allowing an equal product to be offered, and describing the performance or other relevant requirements of the procurement, and any arbitrary actions in the procurement process. The program sponsor must conduct procurements in a manner that prohibits the use of statutorily or administratively imposed state, local, or tribal geographical preference in the evaluation of bids or proposals, except in those cases where applicable federal statutes expressly mandates or encourages geographical preference. Non-competitive procurements can only be awarded in accordance with 2 CFR 200.320C and 7 CFR 226.22 I4. Program sponsors must have written procedures for procurement transactions. These procedures must ensure that all solicitations incorporate a clear and accurate description of the technical requirements for the material, product, or service to be procured. Such description must not, in competitive procurement, contain features which unduly restrict competition. The description may include a statement of the qualitative nature of the material, product, or service to be procured, and when necessary, must set forth those minimum essential characteristics and standard to which it must conform if it is to satisfy the intended use. When it is impracticable or uneconomical to make a clear and accurate description of the technical requirements, a brand name or equivalent description may be used as a means to define the performance requirements of the procurement. The specific features of the name brand, which must be met by offerers, must be clearly stated. Lastly, sponsors must identify all requirements which an offerer must fulfill and all other factors to be used in evaluating quotes, bids, and proposals. Program sponsors must do a terminology crosswalk between federal procurement methods and the state of Oregon procurement methods to determine the most restrictive requirements and follow them unless their local procedures are more restrictive. Menu planning and forecasting based off the average daily participation rate drives the procurement process and methods to be used. As you can see in this slide, federal and state use different terminologies for the procurement methods and have different procurement thresholds. The federal micropurchase and the Oregon small purchase are the same procurement method, with the micropurchase having the more restrictive requirements. In this case, program sponsors will follow the micropurchase requirements. Now let's look at the federal small purchase and the Oregon intermediate procurement. These are the same procurement method, with the Oregon intermediate procurement having the more restrictive requirements. In this case, program sponsors will have to follow the Oregon intermediate procurement requirements. When using competitive sealed bids or proposals, you will have to follow the state of Oregon procurement requirements for over 150,000 because it is more restrictive than the federal requirement of 250,000. Micropurchase method enables sponsors to purchase supplies or services without soliciting competitive quotes if the sponsor considers the price to be reasonable. Sponsors must distribute purchases among all qualified suppliers to the maximum extent practicable and not arbitrarily split the aggregated dollar amount to avoid a more restrictive procurement method. For example, when making a micropurchase, a sponsor must not make all purchases from one source. Rather, the sponsor must make purchases from all qualified sources so that one source does not benefit more than another from the federal award. When using the micropurchase method, sponsors must first develop written specifications in accordance with 2 CFR 200.319D and document all purchases. Second, sponsors must conduct their market research to ensure the price is reasonable in accordance with 2 CFR 200.404. Third, sponsors should use the same process to determine whether a micropurchase falls under the micropurchase threshold as they would to determine if the purchase falls under the small purchase threshold, meaning that they must forecast for the program period based on menu planning and their average daily participation rates. In step 4, sponsors must manage the contract or agreement throughout the transaction. The program sponsor will need to ensure that the vendor provides all the goods and services at the agreed upon fixed price and that they distribute future micropurchases equitably among all qualified sources to the maximum extent practicable. For example, if a program sponsor needs to make a one-time purchase of a product and the purchase price is valued under the micropurchase threshold, it may purchase the product without soliciting quotes. However, if the program sponsor needs to purchase $8,500 worth of lettuce 10 times throughout the program year, the sponsor should plan its needs over the period of time and use a competitive procurement method because the aggregate value of the purchase lies above the micropurchase threshold. Lastly, once the program sponsor determines that the micropurchase is the appropriate procurement method, they need to contact a qualified vendor to make the purchase. Sponsors may use the small purchase method when the estimated amount of the purchase falls below the applicable small purchase threshold, the lowest of the federal, state, and local threshold. Regulation prohibits breaking up solicitations into smaller pieces to avoid the formal procurement process. Even though the informal procurement method is less rigorous, it is important to note that competition is still required and the regulation must be followed. When conducting a small purchase, the program sponsor shall seek at least 3 informally solicited competitive price quotes or competitive proposals from prospective contractors. The program sponsor must keep written records of the source of quotes or proposals received. If 3 quotes or proposals are not reasonably available, fewer will suffice, but the program sponsor shall make written records of the effort the sponsor makes to obtain quotes or proposals. Sponsors must develop and provide written specifications to the vendors and acquire price and rate quotes from an adequate number of vendors. Although quotes might be received over the phone or face-to-face at a market, program sponsors must still document all quotes received. The award is made to the most responsive and responsible bidder with the lowest price. Program sponsors must manage the agreement and ensure that they receive everything from the vendor that the agreement stipulates. Keep in mind that some of the smaller program sponsors may go to local markets or to grocery stores and do all the shopping themselves. In this situation, they may not have a written agreement or contract with a supplier, but still should have documentation detailing the history of the procurement in accordance with the procurement methods used. For some of the smaller program sponsors listening today, the next type of procurement method may not apply to you if your purchases do not exceed $150,000. Formal procurement methods are required for all contract values above the simplified acquisition threshold, which is $150,000 for the state of Oregon. There are 2 different methods when using formal procurement. Sealed bids, sometimes called invitation for bids, and competitive proposals, also called request for proposals. Let's go over them now. In order for sealed bidding to be feasible, the following conditions should be present. A complete, adequate, and realistic specification or purchase description is available. 2 or more responsible bidders are willing and able to compete effectively for the business. And the procurement lends itself to a firm fixed price contract, and the selection of the successful bidder can be made primarily on the basis of price. If sealed bids are used, the following requirements apply. The bids must be solicited from an adequate number of known suppliers, providing them sufficient response time to the date set for the bid opening. The invitation for bid must be publicly advertised. The invitation for bid, which will include any specification and pertinent attachments, must define the items and services in order for the bidder to properly respond. All bids will be open at the time and place prescribed in the invitation for bid. The bids must be open publicly. A firm fixed price contract award will be made in writing to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. Where specified in bidding documents, factors such as discount, transportation cost, and life cycle cost must be considered in determining which bid is lowest. Any and all bids may be rejected if there is sound and documented reason. The technique of competitive proposal is normally conducted with more than one source submitting a proposal, and either a fixed price or cost reimbursable type contract is awarded. It is generally used when conditions are not appropriate for the use of sealed bids. If this method is used, the following requirements apply. Requests for proposals must be publicized and identify all evaluation factors and their relative importance. Any response to a publicized request for proposal must be considered to the maximum extent practicable. Proposals must be solicited from an adequate number of qualified sources. The program sponsor must have a written method for conducting the technical evaluation of the proposals received and for selecting recipients. Contracts must be awarded to the responsible firms whose proposal is most advantageous to the program, with price and other factors scored. Here are the 5 steps to the formal procurement process. Step 1, determine what solicitation tool you will be using. Competitive sealed bidding, otherwise known as the invitation for bid, or competitive proposals, otherwise known as the request for proposal. Then draft the solicitation language that reflects the type of products and services you need. As with the informal process, detailed requirements of the intended agreement, including delivery and packaging conditions. Solicitations must also state the criteria against which an offerer will be evaluated. Step 2, announce the solicitation in print, such as in a newspaper or using an online electronic procurement system. As long as the information is made publicly available, you can also contact known bidders. Program sponsors also must take affirmative steps to include small, minority, women, and labor surplus firms when possible. Step 3, evaluate the response using criteria outlined in the solicitation. Objectively document the evaluation of every offer. This documentation may be needed if you are ever required to demonstrate full and open competition was maintained. Step 4, award the contract to the responsive and responsible vendors who offers the best value based on the evaluation criteria. And lastly, ensure that you receive everything the contract stipulates from the vendor. A non-competitive procurement when using a nonprofit food service account is only allowed to be used when one or more of the 5 circumstances apply in accordance with 2 CFR 200.320C. The acquisition of property or services, the aggregate dollar amount does not exceed the micropurchase threshold. The item is only available from a single source. The public exigency or emergency for the requirement will not permit a delay resulting from a competitive solicitation. The federal awarding agency or pass-through entity expressly authorized non-competitive proposals in response to a written request from a program sponsor, or after solicitation of an adequate number of sources, competition is deemed inadequate. The program sponsor must take all necessary affirmative steps to assure that minority business, women business enterprises, and labor surplus area firms are used when possible. Affirmative steps must include placing qualified small and minority businesses and women business enterprises on the solicitation list, assuring that small and minority businesses and women business enterprises are solicited whenever they are potential sources, dividing total requirements when economically feasible into smaller tasks or quantities to permit maximum participation by small and minority business and women business enterprises, establishing delivery schedules where the requirement permits, which encourages participation by small and minority business and women business enterprises, using the services and assistance as appropriate of such organizations as the Small Business Administration and the Minority Business Development Agency of the Department of Commerce, and requiring that the prime contractor, if subcontracts are to be let, to take affirmative steps. The program sponsor must complete a price and cost analysis for all procurement actions above $250,000 in accordance with both federal and state regulations to include contract modification. The method and degree of the analysis is dependent on the facts surrounding the particular procurement situation. But as a starting point, the program sponsor must make independent estimates before receiving bids or proposals. Program sponsors must negotiate profit as a separate element of the price for each contract in which there is no price competition, and in all cases where cost analysis are performed. Cost or price based on estimated costs for contracts under a federal award are allowable only to the extent that the cost incurred or the cost estimate includes in the negotiated pricing would be allowable for program sponsors in accordance with 2 CFR 200 subpart E. The cost plus a percentage of cost and percentage of construction cost methods of contracting must not be used. Cost reimbursable contracts can only be awarded under the competitive proposal procurement method in accordance with 2 CFR 200.320B2. The program sponsor's contract must contain the applicable contract provisions described in 2 CFR 200 Appendix 2, program regulations, and Oregon Revised Statute 279B. Contracts for more than the simplified acquisition threshold must address administrative, contractual, and legal remedies in the instance where contractors violate or breach contract terms and provide for such sanctions and penalties as appropriate. All contracts in excess of $10,000 must address termination for cause and convenience. All contracts must include equal opportunity provisions. All prime construction contracts in excess of $2,000 awarded by the program sponsor must include a provision for compliance with the Davis-Bacon Act. Where applicable, all contracts awarded by a program sponsor in excess of $100,000 that is involved in the employment of mechanics or laborers must include Contract Work Hours and Safety Standards Act. These requirements do not apply to purchases of supplies and materials or articles ordinarily available on the open market or contracts for transportation or transmission of intelligence. Contracts in excess of $150,000 must contain a provision that requires non-federal award to agree to comply with the Clean Air and Federal Water Pollution Control Act. Debarment and suspension. A contract award must not be made to parties listed on the government-wide exclusion in the system for award management. Contractors that apply or bid for an award exceeding $100,000 must file the required certification in accordance with the Byrd Anti-Lobbying Amendment. Procurement of required material must be addressed in accordance with 2 CFR 200.323. And lastly, prohibition on certain telecommunication and video surveillance services or equipment in accordance with 2 CFR 200.216. Program sponsors can find all the information we just covered in 2 CFR 200.318 through 2 CFR 200.327, 7 CFR 226.22, and the Oregon Revised Statute 279B. Dee Dee will now go over additional resources and the procurement plan template.
Great, thank you, Richard. That's a lot of useful information about state and federal procurement requirements. So as you all heard, there is a lot to consider when procuring goods and services for the CACFP. Luckily, we do have tools, resources, and templates to help guide you through the varying requirements to ensure compliance. 3 important ODE CMP web pages are listed on the screen. The first is our ODE CMP Nutrition Procurement Resources webpage. Kathy will put the link in the chat for you now. This webpage houses procurement resources for all nutrition programs administered by ODE CMP. This includes CACFP, the Summer Food Service Program, and the school nutrition programs, NSLP and SBP. Please be aware that while there are many similarities in the procurement requirements between the different programs, there are also nuances. That is why, in addition to our All CMP procurement webpage, we also have CACFP specific procurement trainings available on our CACFP training webpage. Again, Kathy will drop the link into the chat. We do encourage you and your staff to watch these recorded trainings at your convenience. Lastly, on our CACFP resources webpage, you can locate the procedure tab, which will include copies of the ODE CMP CACFP procurement templates that we will discuss moving forward. Under the quick reference guide tab on the same webpage, you'll find our newly released Getting Started with the Procurement Guide for CACFP sponsors. The link for our CACFP resources webpage has also been added to the chat. One resource available on the CMP procurement webpage is showing on the screen now. This is the procurement decision tree, which provides information on which types of procurement you should use and the regulations associated with them. Again, Kathy will put the link into the chat. Next up is our new resource titled Getting Started with Procurement. This guide provides the basics of procurement for CACFP sponsors. The link to this resource was sent in an email a few days ago if you registered early enough. If not, Kathy will provide the link in the chat for this resource. Again, it can be found on our CACFP resources webpage that we previously discussed. Resources are also helpful in creating a written procedure for your organization's procurement. Once you know everything you are required to do for procurement, you can figure out how to implement it within your organization. In this section, Shirley and I will be using the foundation that Richard provided and showing how to integrate that knowledge into your organization's day-to-day procurement and your written procurement procedures. This brings us to our first poll. So we'll go ahead and get that up on the screen for you all. We do just want to get a sense of where you're at right now, so please be honest. We're not tracking the answers. So we want to know, do you and your organization have a current written procurement procedure? Yes, no, or not sure? Go ahead and answer in the poll. We'll give you just a moment. All right, about 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let's go ahead and close that poll. All right, so it looks like most of you do have a written procurement procedure, so that's great. It is a requirement to have a written procurement procedure. And in the next part of the training, we will do an overview of the ODE CMP templates. So you can follow along to ensure that your procedure does include all of the necessary information. For those of you that said no or not sure, you'll want to pay a little bit closer attention to the next part. All right, so as I said, written procurement procedure is a requirement for all child nutrition program sponsors. ODE CMP has developed several templates you can use, including one for both small and large sponsors. These templates include most of the necessary requirements that Richard went over, and we highly recommend that you use them. At the very minimum, we recommend you use them as a reference or a checklist when developing your own. These procurement procedures do not need to be updated annually. However, we do recommend reviewing them on a yearly basis in case anything needs to be updated and to ensure that all current procedures are complying with regulations. The written procurement plan is important because it provides the staff at your organization with a full understanding of how to implement these procurement steps and why it has to be done that way. This is the reason the written procurement plan must include the policy, which are the regulatory requirements that must be followed. This is also known as the why. The written plan also needs to include the purpose, or what you are trying to achieve, and the step-by-step procedures showing how you are achieving the why. Within the procedures, each step will need to include the who, when, where, and how. The who should include the title and/or position, not the names of the people who hold the position, since there may be turnover in that role. The when goes over the timeline of each procedure or the flow of the procedure. The where includes where the documentation is maintained. The how then goes into the actions that are taken or are implemented. These are the steps taken to properly procure for your organization's CACFP operation. The two ODE CMP templates that were provided to you prior to the webinar, but in case you don't have them, we'll again make sure you get those links. Thanks, Kathy. You're welcome to follow along on the blank templates, or I will have sections of the template pulled up for us to review during the presentation. Before we get into specific sections, let's do a quick overview of how to use the template. You'll notice on the template there are gray fields in each section. Those gray areas indicate a place that needs to be completed by you as the sponsor and will be specific to your organization's operations. Please ensure that all sections are fully completed if applicable, and add in as much detail as needed to make each step clear. If there is a field that is not applicable to your organization, you may delete it from the template. Remember, this template is meant to be customized so that it matches your organization's exact plan. If changes need to be made outside of the gray areas, do so. But keep in mind that as an organization, you are responsible for ensuring that all applicable rules and regulations are followed. If you're using the CACFP specific templates, there are a few things you will want to understand in comparison to other more generalized child nutrition procurement templates. First, it does not include the Buy American provision that is required for the National School Lunch Program, or NSLP. Second is that CACFP regulations, which are listed in 7 CFR 226, vary a bit from other child nutrition programs, including the National School Lunch Program, the School Breakfast Program, and the Summer Food Service Program. However, the Regulation 2 CFR 200 Subpart D does apply to all child nutrition programs, including CACFP. All sponsors are unique in their own way, so know that no template will cover every one of your procurement procedures perfectly. There is no one-size-fits-all template. As we are going through the CACFP specific templates, keep in mind that while they may get you 80% of the way there, you will still need to understand the requirements that which Richard went over earlier and apply them to your own procedures. I'm sure all of you are ready to start filling in your written procurement procedure templates if you haven't done so already. But the first step is to determine which template you will want to use. Before you even start on your procedures, you will need to understand which requirements apply to your organization. While some requirements apply to all sponsors, Large sponsors, which are sponsors who need to use formal procurements because they've purchased more than $150,000, have some additional requirements related to the use of sealed bids and competitive proposals. While large sponsors may also use informal procurement for some purchases, the use of formal procurement is their defining characteristic. If you are not a large sponsor, you would be a small sponsor. And as a small sponsor, you will not have any purchases that will exceed the $150,000 threshold and will only need to use informal procurement methods. So let's go to our next poll here. We'd like to figure out whether we have more large sponsors or small sponsors on the call today. So we'll get that poll up and go ahead and pick whichever one you feel is best for your organization. All right, so if you guys can pick which one is best, a large sponsor, small sponsor. If you're not sure or on the cusp, just go ahead and pick which one feels right. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. We'll go ahead and close that poll. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so it looks like we actually have about an even split between small and large sponsors today. So many sections of the templates that we'll go over will apply to both large and small sponsors, but the large sponsors, you will want to pay special attention when we get to our section on the formal procurement. So hopefully this training will help you complete the templates or create your own or update your own, whether you are a large or small sponsor. We're going to go back to our decision tree. And you can see that the regulations that CACFP sponsors must follow include 7 CFR 226.22 and 2 CFR 200.318 through 327. Large sponsors will need to know informal, formal, and non-competitive procurement requirements, while small sponsors will not need to follow formal procurement methods. Knowing which regulations apply to your organization matters because once we start looking into our written procurement plan, the policy will differ for large versus small sponsors, where the large sponsors will have more requirements to follow. The purpose, however, will likely be the same. You are trying to procure within the regulatory requirements and allow open competition. Let's go ahead and see how this looks within the templates. All right, so in the ODE CMP templates, the regulations or the why is listed out already and linked to the online Code of Federal Regulations or the Oregon Public Statutes page. Each blue link in the templates refers to the relevant regulation. On this slide, there are several regulations that you can find throughout the template. If you create your own procurement procedures, make sure that the appropriate regulatory citations are included so everyone who reviews your procedure can refer to them and understand why you must follow the plan as written. Why is it necessary to have written procurement procedures and for sponsors to follow them? It's necessary to ensure that as a recipient of federal funds, your organization uses those funds to purchase goods, products, and/or services for use in the child and adult care food program in compliance with 2 CFR Part 200.318 through 200.327 and 7 CFR Part 226.22, the details which Richard went over earlier. For large sponsors, it includes formal procurement regulations as well. If you are using the ODE CMP templates, this is provided to you, and all you have to do is enter into the gray highlighted sections. Once you know the why, the purpose becomes clear. The purpose is the same for both templates and includes a statement that procurement will include full and open competition. You don't need to make any changes or add anything else if you are using ODE's template. If you are creating your own procedure, make sure to include this section. For all sponsors, it is important that your staff understands the purpose of the written procedure. So we've covered the policy or the why and the purpose for the CACFP procurement plan. Now let's move on to the procedure itself, which is how you are implementing these steps. While we won't have time to go over every part of the procedure in detail, we will cover some of the important things to consider. Let's start with the who. The implementation of procurement will vary widely from organization to organization, and this is especially true when it comes to identifying the staff who will be responsible for procurement. Think to yourself, who is responsible for procurement oversight in your organization right now? And who is responsible for the individual steps that make up your procurement procedures? There may be a lot of different people involved, or just one or two. This is why it is important to identify all titles and positions in your procedure. The reason why you want titles and positions and not individual names is because staff may turn over and you want the procedure to be relevant even if Jim, the procurement manager, leaves. And turnover is also why it's a good idea to identify additional staff who can complete the same tasks. If Jim gets another job or is unavailable for a month, is there someone else who can take over his duties and ensure that tasks still get completed? Time for another poll. So we'll go ahead and open this one up. I'd like you all to think about your procurement procedures and choose all of the staff that are responsible in some way for procurement at your organization. Is this your authorized representative, food program coordinator, financial office contact, board of directors, procurement manager, or kitchen manager? Are they involved with procurement? Are there any other staff? If so, please go ahead and add those to the chat box now. We'll give you guys some time to think through this one. I'm going to put myself on mute for just a moment and we'll come back and count down. And it's okay if you don't know everyone who's involved in procurement. Part of why we want to do this poll is just to help you all think about that, think about through who's involved in those procedures. All right, we'll count down 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okay, go ahead and close that poll. All right, so it looks like we do have a whole variety of staff who are involved with procurement. And as we mentioned earlier, procurement varies so much from organization to organization. So it's important to customize your procurement procedures and make sure that you are creating written procedures that reflect your organization. So looks like you all have a good variety there. For all organizations, though, there should be oversight on these procurement from responsible principals. If you are not familiar with the term responsible principals or responsible individuals, this is a term used in child nutrition programs to identify managers or coordinators who have oversight duties and determine how CACFP is run at your organization. So again, this includes authorized representatives, food program coordinators, financial office contacts, and if available, board of directors. In large organizations with a dedicated procurement manager, they can also be considered a responsible principal when it comes to procurement duties. For more information on the roles and duties of responsible principals, you can view our new CACFP sponsor staff training, which goes over this in more detail. Kathy will drop that link into the chat box for you now. The staff who are in charge of oversight may not be the same ones as the staff who does the day-to-day task of procuring. Remember to include all staff with procurement responsibilities in your written procedure. Identify their roles and the backups. For example, if you have a kitchen manager who is responsible for emergency procurement, you will also want to include the title of the person who completes this duty when the kitchen manager is not available. In this example, the site lead will be the backup. We're focusing on the who quite a bit because you will notice that most of the gray boxes in your template is for entering the position titles. When using the ODE CMP template, the regulations or requirements are mostly included already, so you only need to identify who is responsible for the required task. On the screen, we have a section of the template, and you can see that each of the cited regulatory requirements includes a task that needs to be completed, and someone at your organization will need to be identified and included. Remember to use the position title and not their name. In the template, there isn't a place to include backups, so this is one area where you can add to the template. After you identify all the staff that take part in procurement, we can check off the who and move on to the when. The when is the timeline or flow for how the procedure should be developed, reviewed, implemented, and updated. As a reminder, once implemented, the written procurement plan does not expire. However, it is best practice to review and update as necessary on an annual basis. The written procurement plan must accurately reflect the actual procurement practices of your organization at all times and must be in compliance with state and federal regulations. It needs to include the date that the procedure was implemented. You also want to think about the different dates or times of the year when certain steps must be taken. For example, large sponsors with formal procurement requirements that require bids to be publicized, remember to include the length of time that formal bid announcements are run. In Oregon, it is a minimum of 14 days for an invitation to bid and 30 days for a request for proposal. You may have organization-specific timelines as well. Add in any additional timelines or timeframes to the template as needed. Okay, let's go back and check our progress. We previously reviewed the policy or the why and the purpose for the plan. Now we can check off the who and the when, and we'll move on to the where. This includes where the documentation is stored, and in some cases, where procurement will take place. While we don't have the where listed in the procurement plan template specifically, sponsors should include this information somewhere in the written procedure. This should include the location of the procurement records and any signed contracts that are maintained in your organization. This information should be clearly described, so even new or minimally trained staff can locate the documents upon request. As we transition to using more electronic files, it may be helpful to include pathways to locate the file in your drive. From here, I'm going to go ahead and pass you all off to Shirley, and she'll be taking you through the remainder of the procedure templates.
Thank you, Dee Dee. Now that we have gone through the who, when, and where, let's focus on the how. This will be a large part of your procedures since it will describe the steps your organization takes to complete your procurement process. Whether or not you use our template, the how must include detailed step-by-step instructions that provides information on how goods and services are procured for use in your child nutrition programs. It is always a good idea to include links to the regulations, guidance memos, and resources that you use to develop each step of your procurement. In our templates, a lot of this is already completed for you. Thank you, Richard. Consider the forms that need to be completed, how documents are verified for accuracy and compliance, how double checks are completed, and specific instructions for each step that are taken. All of this will depend on the method of purchasing that is used and why that method was chosen. Your procurement plan should be written in a way so that minimally trained staff are able to follow and complete the process per regulations. You do not need to recreate the wheel, but you do need to ensure that staff have the information necessary to meet federal, state, and local requirements. And your steps will vary depending on a few factors, including whether you are a large or small sponsor and whether your organization has its own procurement threshold. On the screen, we have the procurement crosswalk, which is included in both procurement templates. You can see that formal procurement is included, and this will only be applicable to large sponsors. This crosswalk table includes the main methods of procurement and the federal and state thresholds that applies to each method of procurement. Richard had gone over these methods of procurement and the different thresholds earlier, but just as a reminder, Oregon state thresholds are lower than the federal threshold for both the small and intermediate procurements and for formal procurements. In all situations, you will want to follow the strictest thresholds, which in the case of small or intermediate and formal procurement will be the state threshold. In addition to these federal and state thresholds, though, you will want to consider your own organization's procurement threshold. Large organizations are more likely to have their own procurement threshold, but even if you are a small organization, check with your director, finance office, or board chairs to see if there are any additional internal procurement requirements that you need to keep in mind. So now it's time to do another quick poll, and let's open up that poll. Does your organization have internal procurement thresholds for different procurement methods? And you can say yes, no, or not sure. And if it's not sure, that's okay too. You can definitely check it out with your management team or board after our webinar. And just a few seconds more. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let's close the poll and see the results. All right, so it looks like the majority of you said yes. So if you do have internal procurement thresholds, it's important that you are comparing those thresholds to the state and federal thresholds, and then following the strictest guidelines, even if that stricter guidelines are your own. And if you said you're not sure, that's okay for now, but do make sure that you follow up with somebody at your organization afterward, just so you know that you're following that strictest threshold available. So let's take a look at this example, which is filled in with a sample sponsor's procurement threshold in the rightmost column. If you have internal procurement thresholds, fill in this part of the table on the templates and compare to find the lowest number. Let's look at this with each procurement method. For micropurchasing, all the thresholds are the same, so that makes it easy to decide when micropurchasing can be used. Next, for small or intermediate procurement, you have the internal procurement threshold, which is the lowest, where small and intermediate procurement can only be used with purchases lower than $100,000. In this case, you will follow the internal threshold since this is the most restrictive. With formal procurement, internal threshold is higher than the state threshold. And in this case, you would follow the state guideline and use formal procurement methods when you are purchasing more than $150,000. This is because the state threshold in this case is the most restrictive. Finally, in regards to capital equipment, most of the time, capital equipment is the purchase of equipment greater than $5,000. Special approvals are required for capital equipment. In this example, because the internal threshold is higher than the state and federal threshold, the state and federal threshold of $5,000 would be the most restrictive and would need to be used. Once you understand which thresholds you have to follow, you can start determining how you will meet those requirements. We will start with the micropurchase template. Even if you are a large sponsor, sometimes you may need to use the micropurchasing method. Earlier, Richard provided guidance on when micropurchasing should and should not be used and the 5 basic steps of micropurchasing. We are going to take that knowledge and apply it to the template that's already been developed. In this section, all of the regulations are cited along with the state and federal threshold of $10,000. If you have a lower internal threshold, you can update that amount. Review the requirements and figure out who is responsible for each requirement and enter their titles into those gray boxes. Similarly, with the informal small and intermediate procurement methods, the template already lays out all the regulations and requirements, and the main task is to figure out who is responsible for each task. The one additional item you will want to add would be any additional or other specifications that will inform your decision when you are awarding contracts. Other specifications can also include geographic requirements, length of contract, or any other quality that is important to you. Moving on to formal procurements. This is for our large sponsors only. And if you are following along on the templates, you can find this on page 5 of the large sponsor template. Richard had also discussed sealed bids and competitive proposals. These are also known as invitation to bid or IFB and request for proposals or RFPs respectively. You can choose either of these when you have contracts whose costs are more than $150,000 or based off of your internal threshold. So thinking about your own program now, if you are a large sponsor, which method would you use? Most likely, you will use a mix of both methods depending on the contract type. While they are very similar, sealed bids are often used on bids that are all the same. For example, if you want to buy milk, your specifications for milk will be the same no matter which organization is providing the milk. A child care center serving the 3 to 5 age group would want 1% or non-fat unflavored milk only. If, however, you are looking for contracts that may require competitive negotiation, the competitive proposal or RFP should be used. An example of a contract using competitive proposals might look like a contract for the point of service meal count and menu software. Different vendors may have different services beyond the specifications that you require, and the evaluation of the bids may depend on negotiating these different additional areas of concern. All of this should be considered before you start working on your written procurement plan. Next, you will want to determine who will be your authorized purchaser. Then you will figure out how you will announce your formal proposal and when your advertisement will be run. These are the who, where, and when pieces that Didi discussed earlier. After that, you will then include the most restrictive threshold that will require formal procurement, which may be either your internal threshold or the state threshold of $150,000. For fair and open competition, it's important that all vendors are given the opportunity to bid on the same specifications. And many of these purchase conditions are laid out in the large sponsor template. There are 36 purchase conditions, and we won't go over all of them, but you can review them on pages 6 through 9 of that template. Most of these conditions do not require you to enter in any information, but it's important to review all of them and make sure that they are all incorporated into any announcements and bid specifications. As always, the when is important so that all vendors know what time frame they are working with, whether contract length, bid date, or delivery schedule. Sponsors do have responsibilities to oversee all contracts that are awarded. And remember that affirmative steps should be taken to include minority and small businesses. Of course, all bids must meet CACFP regulations and civil rights compliance, as well as record-keeping compliance, including invoicing requirements. All of these specifications that are created must meet 2 CFR 200.319 and also 7 CFR 226.22H11. Both regulatory citations are very similar, but we pulled the regulation on the screen from 7 CFR 226 since it's more concise. The person who develops any specifications for bids must meet this requirement by having clear and accurate descriptions of the items or services that are being procured. This description, however, cannot be so restrictive that it unduly restricts competition. When writing specifications, it is important to set minimum essential characteristics and standards, but not be so detailed that it becomes impractical for vendors to meet it. For example, stating that you will only accept number 10 cans of great value diced tomatoes may restrict the number of bids that can apply. Instead, stating number 10 cans of great value diced tomatoes or equal will broaden the field. In this case, it is the number 10 can and the diced tomatoes which are the specific features that are important to the bid. Keeping the regulations in mind when developing specifications, sponsors must include their criteria for selection or evaluation. The template provides a few examples to include, such as meeting the specifications and meeting delivery schedules. However, you may have additional criteria that should be met, such as return policies or payment methods. In addition to the selection process, sponsors will also want to include the criteria that will be included in the bids. This can include the price, the services, quality, geographic preferences, and any additional criteria that is important to the organization. The procurement templates are only a guide, and sponsors can update the templates to suit their needs. Specifications are an area where each individual organization's needs will vary greatly. The last procurement method is non-competitive and emergency procurement. Richard went over the limited number of circumstances earlier where this type of procurement applies. As we all have seen in the last few years, though, even though there are only a limited situations where you can use emergency procurement, it's often very urgent when you need to use it. And that's why it's a good idea to have these procurement policies in place. Like the rest of the template, most of the regulations and steps are already written out in the template. So the only thing you will need to do is to figure out which staff member will be taking on these duties when the need arises. There are additional sections of the template that we didn't go over today. The sections on record keeping, equipment purchases, standards of conduct, and minority, women-owned, and small business will apply to all sponsors. However, the other sections on intergovernmental agreements, purchasing goods and services using cooperative agreements, agents and third-party services, food service management companies, USDA foods, and cost reimbursable contracts will not apply to all sponsors. For sections that do not apply, sponsors are welcome to delete them, or you can just write not applicable next to each of those sections. For the sections that do apply, the template lays out the regulatory requirements and generally will only require the addition of the position or title of the sponsor staff who is responsible for overseeing them. So having gone through the procurement templates and compared it against the required parts of the procurement plan, you can see that templates are pretty helpful because it provides the policy and purpose, and it lays out a general procedure where sponsors can add in the who, when, and where as necessary. So now that you have seen our ODE CMP procurement templates, let's get a sense of whether this template will be something that you and your peers will use. So let's open up the poll and let us know, are you using or do you plan to use the ODE CMP procurement templates? Yes, no, or not sure. And it's okay if you're not sure yet too. And we'll give it just a few more seconds. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, so let's share those results. All right, so it looks like the majority said yes, and a few of you said not sure, and that's okay. And so the templates do provide you with most of the information that's needed to getting started with procurement. So we do recommend that you use this information. And while we recommend the use of the ODE developed templates, know that there are no templates out there that will be all-inclusive for your organization's needs. We expect that you will need to make some updates based on your organization structures or procedures. And it is important that even if you are just following the templates to have a good understanding of what the federal and state regulations are, make sure that you are following them. And make sure that you understand what the current procurement practices look like at your organization. You need to understand the boots on the ground situation before you can assess whether you are meeting regulatory requirements or not, and also how to best update your internal procedures if you need to make changes. Finally, understand who is responsible for all procurement duties at your organization. Who will be implementing these procedures? Who are the backups if the responsible individual is not available? So now that you have a better understanding of how to complete a procurement template, let's take a look at a scenario. We don't have polls for this scenario, so go ahead and answer in the chat box. We have Williams After School Program, which has 2 sites, and all vendor contracts are under $80,000 a year. For this sponsor, what procurement template should they use? Should they use the ones for large or small sponsors? And go ahead and answer in the chat. All right, yeah, so the answers are coming in. I'll give you just a few more seconds to think about it. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, perfect. So it looks like everybody got it right. I saw just a whole bunch of smalls coming in. So the answer is small sponsor template. Great job, everybody. So the reason why they are using the small sponsor template is because all of their contracts are under the formal procurement threshold of $150,000. So unless the sponsor has an internal procurement threshold requiring formal procurements under $80,000, then using that small sponsor template will fit all of their needs. Let's go to our next question. If the program does have an internal micropurchasing threshold of $15,000, can the organization follow their internal threshold instead? Think about it for a few seconds. You can consult your quick reference guide handout if you have that available. So the answers are coming in. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And great job, everybody. So it looks like everybody has been paying attention. The answer is no. And this is because the state and federal micropurchasing threshold of $10,000 is lower than the internal threshold. If there are different thresholds, you will always follow the one that has the lowest number. Finally, as a small sponsor, will the program need to make sure that small minority and women-owned businesses are used when possible? And let's see those answers come rolling in. All right, so 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And yes, absolutely. So you guys all are doing a wonderful job answering. So most everybody, I think actually everybody in the chat got the right answer. And of course, the answer is yes. This requirement to take affirmative steps to ensure that small minority and women-owned businesses are used does apply to all child nutrition program sponsors, no matter how large or small the sponsor may be. So thank you all for taking part in this. I'm now going to turn this over to Kathy for the question and answer portion of the webinar.
Thanks, Shirley. Last, but definitely not least, is our question and answers section. When you registered, you had the option to submit questions to be covered during this webinar. Here, we'll go over a few of those scenarios. And after we go over these prepared questions and answers, we'll take a look at any questions that have come into the chat during the webinar. Here is our first question. Regarding the micropurchase threshold, what does the aggregate dollar amount mean? Richard, could you answer this question for us?
Yes, Kathy. The aggregate dollar amount is the amount, the purchase price, including taxes and delivery charges for the term of the agreement. Program sponsors must also account for allowable contract extensions. The term of the agreement is the period of time that the agreement is for, meaning if this is a reoccurring purchase, the aggregate dollar amount would be the total purchase price for all potential occurrences.
Thanks, Richard. Our next question is also around the micropurchase threshold. What does it mean to distribute equitably? Shirley, could you take this question?
Sure. To distribute equitably, sponsors must spread purchases among all qualified suppliers so that one vendor does not benefit more than another vendor over the course of the program period from the federal award.
Thank you, Shirley. Our next question is, do you need to get competitive price or rate quotations under the micropurchase procurement method? Dee Dee, would you like to answer this?
I would. Thanks, Kathy. Using micropurchase procurement, it may be awarded without soliciting competitive price or rate quotations if the non-federal entity considers the price to be reasonable. Micropurchase is considered to be a non-competitive procurement method.
Thanks, Dee Dee. The next question is regarding the small purchases requirement. What time basis is the small purchases requirements based on? Richard, could you answer this for us?
That's a good question. USDA Food and Nutrition Services has stated that to the state agency that the small purchase period of performance may not be longer than 1 year.
All right, thank you. The next question sponsors would like to know is if their organization has to draft specifications for all procurement methods. Shirley, can you help us on this?
Yes, I can. The answer is yes. 2 CFR 200.319D requires clear and accurate descriptions for the goods or services to be procured, and all of the requirements the suppliers must meet. Meaning, it does not matter if the procurement method is informal or formal. Either way, specifications must be drafted.
Thanks, Ms. Shirley. Moving along, someone would like to know how many procurement methods there are. Dee Dee, can you answer this?
I will. So there are 5 procurement methods available in accordance with 2 CFR 200.320. These are micropurchase, small purchase, sealed bids or IFB, competitive proposals or RFP, and non-competitive procurement, all of which we did review here today.
Thanks, Dee Dee. Next, the audience would like to know the best ways to choose local. Richard, want to help us out with this?
Yes, I can. If the cost is under the micropurchase threshold, the program sponsors can do a non-competitive award using the micropurchase procurement method. If not, the program sponsor will have to use a competitive procurement method and add a geographical preference provision to their solicitation in accordance with 7 CFR 226.22N and USDA memo CACFP 02-2013.
Thank you, Richard. To piggyback off of that, a question was submitted on how can sponsors shop at farmers markets and if it's allowed. I'm going to send this to Shirley for the assist.
Roger that, Kathy. Sponsors can shop at a farmer's market, and to do so, they will follow the appropriate procurement method identified in 2 CFR 200.320. In most cases, this purchase will fall under the micropurchase threshold.
All right, thank you for that info, Shirley. The final question we had sent to us in advance is how does the procurement change depending on the location? So whether it's urban, rural, frontier. Dee Dee, can I call on you for this one?
You sure can, Kathy. The procurement requirements do not change based on location. Program sponsors must use the appropriate procurement method based on the purchase threshold and follow the standards identified in 2 CFR 200.318 through 327 and 7 CFR 226.22.
Great, thank you, Dee Dee. So we've had a couple additional questions come in through the chat during the webinar. We're going to take a couple moments here to go through those real quick, and then we'll be right back to answer them. And if anyone else has any additional questions as well, now's your time to enter them into the chat. So we'll be back with you in just a moment. So one of the first questions we had was, will ODE be sharing this recording? Shirley, can you take this one for us?
Yes, I can. So yes, we will absolutely be sharing this recording. We try to get it up into YouTube within about a week, but we will have this available hopefully in time for the follow-up email that will be sent out within 3 to 7 days.
Great, Shirley. Thanks for giving us that timeline as well on that. And then the next question that came in was, what if a broadline distributor doesn't want to guarantee prices for the next year? We are a small group. Richard, what do you have to say on this one?
So this is a common problem, and this is the reason why USDA FNS says that the small procurement is only good for 1 year because most vendors won't guarantee pricing long term. So you have two options. You could either put a price escalator in your solicitation and tie it to the appropriate standard or index. In our case, the appropriate one would be CPI for food away from home, because that's what reimbursement rates are tied to. And you would never want your contract to increase more than your reimbursement rates are going to increase for budgeting purposes. But if you don't have a price escalator in your solicitation, then you would have to go out and do a new procurement for those goods or services and get awarded new fixed pricing based on that information and the current environment in which we're operating in. So either put a price escalator in your solicitation, or you're going to have to go out and do a new procurement.
Thanks for that info. I'm going to give another minute here. Okay, Richard, you are now in the hot seat once again. How can we forecast when some of our sites close spaces due to COVID?
So in this case, it's very difficult to forecast, but I would, based on projections of your daily participation rates for this coming year in your menus, if your menus haven't changed prior to COVID, I would use those numbers unless you think that your daily participation rates are going to be a lot lower. So when we do it for food service management companies in school districts, I generally recommend that they use, 2019, 2020 numbers, because that's going to be a lot closer than if you tried to use 21, 22 numbers. So go back and look at old meal count numbers and forecast based off that. If your menus change or you expect a big change in daily participation rates, you're going to have to, basically do your best guess off of that information. Just remember that menu planning and your daily participation rate is what drives the procurement method that you use. So that's the starting point.
Great, thank you, Richard. Yeah, that definitely has thrown a wrench in many operations, including procurement. And we did have one additional question come in, and we're going to discuss that one just a wee bit, and we'll be right back on. All right, and we're turning this back over to our procurement specialist, Richard. What happens if no one bids on your business?
This can happen. It's actually not as uncommon as you may think, but the first thing you want to do is look at your solicitation and check to see if it's overly restrictive, the requirements. And then the second thing you need to do is look at the environment in which you're operating in, especially for rural communities. And if you're having this problem and you cannot find somebody to bid on your business, go reach out to myself first. But we have state price agreement that we can use. There are rules and regulations that USDA has set around them, but we can always take a look at those too. So there's not a one answer fits all for this, but generally we start with looking at our solicitation to make sure it's not overly restrictive, looking at your location, and then we start looking at price agreements that are already in place that were procured by the state procurement agency.
That is some really useful knowledge. Thanks much there, Richard. All right, and it looks like that has ended our questions on this subject. So with that, if you have any other additional questions regarding procurement, please do reach out to your assigned specialist or Richard. And Dusty, I'm going to send it back over to you for our wrap up.
Thanks, Kathy. ODE CMP also sends out a monthly newsletter called Knowing and Growing. This newsletter will include all new memos that were released in the past month, in addition to information available on grants, trainings, and important deadlines. This is sent out each month to all responsible principals listed in your CMP Web sponsor info sheet. And information in this newsletter must be reviewed by the responsible principals. Memo updates and program updates are required information for sponsors to know. while additional grant information and resources are helpful to review. If you're not on the list and you would like to receive the newsletter, you can sign up using the link in this slide that will be shared in the chat box. Thank you for joining us today for the Oregon Department of Education Child Nutrition Program's procurement training. We appreciate all that you do for the children of Oregon. If you have any further questions, please reach out to your assigned child nutrition specialist. Before we end our session today, here's a short message from the Oregon Department of Education. ODE supports equity and excellence for every learner and seeks to work with school districts, education service districts, and community partners like you. We believe all children should have access to high quality, well-rounding learning experience. This organization is an equal opportunity provider. Thank you for joining us today.